All right. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Sarah Charles. I did my PhD in the psychobiology of social bonding. And I think it was on Friday, you spoke to a streamer. And in the middle of that talk, sorry about that. It was a side note, but you mentioned um, religion and you saying how left-leaning people tend to kind of dismiss religion out of hand,
Hmm.
and they don't necessarily consider the kind of the social side of things as much as they should.
Hmm.
And I guess I just wanted to say that, like, my research on was not just about social bonding. I was also looking at specifically almost the role of religious ritual on social bonding, and if the role of religion in particular was important because of past research that you might have been citing that suggests that religion is important in social bonding.
Hmm. Yeah. So
And I guess, you know,
yeah, I'll state what my opinion on this is, kind of like what I mentioned before, just so everybody's up to speed. So my thing I was pointing out there is I think that oftentimes left-leaning people can be really quick to dismiss religion and like everything that comes with religion and just throw that completely out the window. And I understand there are definitely some really harmful negative aspects of religion that I do recognize. However, religion has historically filled a very unique and very, not necessarily unique, but a very important social function, which is the function of community, which is these, these rituals that we talk about, the interactions, the, structured nature of it. And these things are very important for the well-being of human beings. We often see how people that are part of religious groups often do better on a wide range of different metrics of well-being, such as mental health and amount of friends, and loneliness, depression, and all the rest of it. And I think that sometimes a lot of left-wing people would just be like, oh, everything that is religion has to be with religion, we just throw that out entirely and forget about the rest of it. However, I think that we need to recognize that, hey, religion, it touches on something that is very important, and we need to kind of get at that at some way. We can't just throw out the baby with the bathwater, kind of, and get rid of the entirety of religion without having some other forms of community services in place in order to fill that important role of the communal and social bonding that religious has filled previously in history.
okay, yeah. So I do largely agree with you there, but I think the historic focus on religion, the problem with how psychologists have kind of measured well-being in context of religion is that they've often conflated religion with attendance of religious ritual.
Mm-hmm.
And if you look at a secular equivalent, so something called Sunday Assembly, which was started in the early 2010s in London, and since then, Sunday assemblies have popped up around the world. Obviously, the coronavirus pandemic has definitely made it less easy to happen, but it's basically doing church without God, is how they've described it.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is modeled itself on like an evangelical worship session, but instead of a sermon, you get kind of a TED style talk. So it could be about kind of feminist poetry, it could be about your local flora and fauna, whatever. It's kind of a TED style talk instead of a sermon. And instead of singing hymns, you sing uplifting songs like, U2's It's a Beautiful Day or whatever. But the idea is it simulates the ritual of kind of, say, the church ritual, but in a very secular context.
Mm-hmm.
And what my research found was that in terms of social side effects, there was absolutely no difference between the two types of ritual. And I found that to be very interesting. So obviously, what you're suggesting is that religion as a framework seems to bring people together, right? It has people or gives them an excuse to come together more frequently.
Mm-hmm.
But it's that the coming together more frequently it seems to be what is beneficial, not religion in and of itself. And I think it's very important when people talk about the benefits of religion. They're not saying religion is the necessary component. It's just religion tends to provide a good rationale to get together every week to appear at this ritual where you're taking part and seeing friends and talking to your community. And it's kind of more about understanding that the framework of a religious doctrine is the useful part, because it causes people to come into the rituals, not because of the actual beliefs themselves that are protective.
Yeah, and I agree with 100%, and that's why I was saying that I think I even explicitly stated that, hey, um I do think we need to get at the type of the thing that you talk about, which is the ritualistic nature of it. We need to get at that, and hopefully we'll get at that through some other way that's not religion, because religion in itself carries a bunch of negative parts in it. So I agree with you 100% that it's a coming together that's the important part of the thing. Religion has just been like the kind of the excuse, so to say, or the reason for that historically, and I do definitely believe that we can find other reasons for doing those types of like ritualistic practices in society. 100%, I'm all on board on that. I think that the main thing that I was getting at there specifically, and there might have been a bit of a misunderstanding there, because I agree with 100% everything you said there, is that I don't. I think people will a lot of left wing people will forget that part entirely, and just be like, okay, religion and everything that has to do with religion is going to get thrown out, and then they don't think, okay, so if we want to move towards entirely like a non-religious society, what other forms of community bonding and what other forms of ritualistic practice or whatever are we going to implement then in order to make up for that loss? And that's more of the point I was making. I was in At least I wasn't trying to convey that religion is something that is intrinsically necessary for this process, or that the community thing is only possible through the use of religion. It's just that like religion is the way that is a common way for it to be practiced, and if we don't recognize that, but we strip away the religion, we risk like missing out on that very important part of the human experience if we don't have already alternatives in mind and ready to put in place as soon as that disappears. But yeah.
Brilliant. Okay, yeah. So that was my, I guess, my main point of contention was for me
Mm-hmm.
stemmed from a misunderstanding. But I think it's still useful potentially to maybe discuss, now that I'm here,
Mm-hmm.
stuff about either science, because it seems like the person you were chatting to before I came on didn't understand, one, what science was, or how epistemology worked,
Mm-hmm.
or discussing social bonding and mental health, because that's also something that I research and have published articles on as well. So I'd happily chat to you about that if you'd like, while you've got me here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I actually, I had a few questions about it going into this, because you told me about what your research and what your findings were or whatever. One of the questions I had, and I don't know if this was something that, that was analyzed and broken down in the research and the study that you guys did, but what is it that creates the kind of the positive effects that comes with the community spirit? Is it the shared beliefs? Is it just the close proximity? Is it the structured nature? Is it the rituals that everybody participates in? Is it just all of them equally? Is it like some more than others? Or what is it that these kind of community gatherings really get at that tends to produce these positive outcomes? Or do we know that? Or yeah, where are we at that?
So that's actually a really interesting question. So shared goals and synchronized behavior tends to be two of the major components that people seem to think kind of engenders this kind of feeling of social bonding or community feeling. And it's not necessarily the case that one is better than the other. It's very unclear, because usually if you're synchronizing, you tend to have a shared goal. It's very hard to disambiguate, but it seems to be both of those are key components. And
Mm-hmm.
ritual also seems to be important um, by itself. So people have managed to make something where you have effectively close to identical behaviors, whereas some have been ritualized and some have not been ritualized. I can link you that study later on. I haven't got it to hand immediately, but I can find it for you. Um, and it's kind of a very, very interesting study, especially it was done on children,
Mm-hmm.
which suggests that it's this kind of thing happens early on in life. It's not just in adults, but even in children.
Mm-hmm.
Um, yeah, so that's I don't think necessarily it's one or the other is better, but
Mm-hmm.
it seems to be kind of an additive thing, whereas the more components you have, the better the bonding experience.
Okay. Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So, in there you said that you studied the comparison between religious assembly and the Sunday assembly, right? Was that the comparison that you guys studied for the experiment or for the study?
So across my PhD, I did a few different studies. That was
Mm-hmm.
one of my studies. One of my other studies was looking at secular yoga versus religious yoga.
Okay.
And again, I found the same. I actually found the same thing across both studies, which found that basically the religious framework that was being used didn't affect the level of social bonding that occurred.
Mm-hmm.
It was kind of the increase from before to after the service, or before to after the yoga, was pretty, statistically not significantly be different from zero. And
Mm-hmm.
the reason I phrased it that way is because of the tests I didn't just do an alternative hypothesis test versus a null hypothesis test.
Mm-hmm.
I also did basically tested to see if it was basically equivalent to zero.
Okay.
And it seems to be statistically significantly equivalent to zero. So there is actually no difference between the two using something called a two one-sided test.
Mm-hmm.
Now, some people like to use a Bayesian approach, which they would question me on this, but in a classical statistics kind of way, the kind of common understanding of how people do statistics, you kind of use p-values, and you kind of measure that against how likely something is to occur.
Mm-hmm.
And doing that, what you can do is say, is this not just like, are they different from each other? Yes or no. But you can also say, how are they exactly the same as one another? And basically, we found that secular yoga and religious yoga, as well as Sunday assembly and church, seem to be basically statistically equivalent to one another in increasing social bonding.
Okay, this is actually interesting because I'm actually I'm at university doing sociology there, and I'm currently taking my stats course actually. So the two one-sided tests and everything like that is things I'm actively like doing. I'm being tested on right now, so it's a fun connection there. But one thing I wanted to ask then, so when you did these comparisons, what were the metrics that you guys were looking at to see whether or not they were equivalent or similar like that? What were the outcomes? What were the variables you guys were measuring?
So the main variable that I'm talking about is social bonding. And so social bonding is very much has been historically a vague term.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one that I spend about kind of 90 pages of my PhD thesis defining because it's been vague in the past.
Mm-hmm.
And to spare you all of that 90-page detail, basically it comes down to a short-term emotion that is a feeling of kind of connection or pleasantness towards someone else, which comes with it a desire to kind of meet or their wants or needs.
Okay. So how do you measure that then in the experiment?
So using a kind of classic, there are some issues because of psychology. It's never going to be a precise measurement, but there's
Mm-hmm.
something called psychometrics where you kind of just use questionnaires and you ask someone a series of questions, and you find kind of say a question. Question one asks them how much they like the other person. Question two asks how close they feel to them. Question three is how alike they are to them, and so on and so on. So there's kind
Mm-hmm.
of multiple questions. There's 6 different questions, and then you find the average of those, and that we kind of use as the underlying social bonding score.
Okay, I see. Did you look at any of the other, I guess more that is technically empirically measurable as well, but some of the other things that are often brought up as being like the positives of religion, so to say, historically, when it comes to mental health stuff and amount of like, friendships and, feelings of loneliness or whatever. Is that also something that was looked into for this, or did you focus more on the social bonding stuff exclusively?
For my PhD, I focused mainly on the social bonding. I did also look at other types of emotion, but
Mm-hmm.
my actual focus was looking at also the neurochemistry underlying it. Also, I did stuff looking at pain threshold as a proxy for mu opioid release.
Mm-hmm.
In my field studies, I also used a drug called naltrexone, which blocks opioids in the brain, to see if that would affect whether or not social bonding could occur, and it did, suggesting that opioid pathways play a role in social bonding. But yeah, social bonding was my main focus as opposed to the longer term kind of overarching well-being things. One of
Mm-hmm.
my colleagues, Reverend Jennifer Brown, she's kind of finishing up her PhD.
Mm-hmm.
She was looking at the role of taking part in these rituals and quality of life
Mm-hmm.
longer term. So once she finishes writing up her PhD and getting her results together, I'd be very interested to read what she's put together.
Okay. Do you have any predictions for that? Do you just assume that, hey, it's probably going to be pretty similar to the more secular things when it comes to the quality of life and outcomes there, or do you believe that there might be some differences that arise?
I think the data is probably going to be very messy, in
Mm-hmm.
part because so they didn't look at the yoga things that I did. They were
Mm-hmm.
mainly looking at the Sunday assembly versus church,
Okay.
and because of one of the nature of the beast was that the church population tended to be slightly older than the Sunday assembly population,
Uh-huh.
and as a result, on average, they were reporting slightly worse kind of health issues. Kind of knee problems, back problems, that kind of things, which skews the quality of life downwards somewhat in the church population.
Hmm.
So if you try to account for that, I imagine they would be fairly similar across the board.
Okay, yeah, makes sense. So, then one more question I have, I guess. When it comes to type of measurement, so you mentioned Sunday assembly, you mentioned secular yoga. I assume maybe I'm incorrect on this. Generally, do you think it would be better if we moved towards a more secular society as a whole, where we try to like root out more of the, or not root out, but we try to reduce or just make society more secular, and as an effect of that, you're going to see a reduction in religious assembly and religious congregations and stuff like that. How do you feel about that?
I'm not religious, and I didn't really grow up being religious. I went to Hebrew classes and stuff like that, because I've got a Jewish background, but
Hmm.
I'm not religious myself, and
Hmm.
I would say that I think being secular has its benefits,
Hmm.
not necessarily to my well-being or anything, but just in part because I am less likely to be inclined to believe things that have lack evidentiary support,
Hmm.
whereas oftentimes part and parcel of believing in the supernatural or the super empirical is the fact that it's not empirical, right?
Hmm.
It's outside of the physical. It's metaphysics, and kind of you can run away with the metaphysical and come up with as many stipulations as you like. In for example, I mentioned before, kind of I brought up Pastafarianism to you.
Hmm.
There's Russell's teapot is a classic example. There's the invisible pink unicorn, which is the modern incarnation
Hmm.
of the Russell's teapot. And I think that being secular probably has its benefits in that regard.
Hmm.
But I don't know if I would never want to mandate it. That's
Hmm.
people can believe whatever they want to believe. Um, but I guess I do think that the world would be a better place if secular kind of worldviews were what kind of led to the running of governments and things like that, and religion was what people did in their personal time.
Hmm. Yeah, so then generally it's fair to say, and I'm on the same page as well, that we're comfortable and even, supportive of the general movement towards secularization that we're seeing in society as a whole. So then my question to you would be then, what community structures, what types of yeah, what types of activities, what types of rituals would you see, or would you predict, or would you hope would be our best bet at still retaining a lot of these community, practices and stuff like that has been historically, and that even is currently filled in large parts by religious assembly.
So in the post-COVID era, because obviously when with COVID
It's difficult, yeah.
social distancing and stuff like that, it becomes harder to have get-togethers. But I would hope, people are encouraged and that there's more funding put towards um, incentive, like local choirs or kind of local activity groups and support groups. One of the things that is widely understood by sociologists I've spoken to, at the very least, that how to say reduce kind of young male listlessness or kind of young male uh, kind of being young males being taken up into gangs, stuff like that, is having strong youth support networks and having activity centres basically where they can come and I don't know, like do music together or play football or do whatever, and having those kind of centres have greater funding, I think is like, a realistic uh, way of trying to encourage more secular get-togethers, which encourages community and social bonding.
Okay, so yeah, just all forms of endeavors then. So Sunday assembly, extracurricular activities, clubs. You mentioned the choir and stuff like that. Just like I kind of like a wide scale approach, not necessarily like one specific thing that you would like to see implemented. So, for example, I think it was Pete Buttigieg that preferred or that proposed this, in the Democratic primaries, or something of the sort, where it was every, I think it was Sunday, I'm not sure exactly what day it is, there would be community initiatives where members of like a local community would come together in teams, and they would basically go around and they would clean up their local communities, picking up trash, maybe taking care of gardens, public parks, and the rest of it like that. And that was kind of proposed as a way to bring forth more community bonding across smaller local communities. And then there was, I don't remember exactly if it was like a, hey, this is something you have to do thing, or if it was like just like an optional thing that was highly encouraged, maybe even rewarded to some extent, with some forms of, compensation. But I remember that being a proposal. How would you feel about something like that?
I mean, to me, that sounds almost a bit like mutual aid, right? You're going around with people, helping other people by cleaning up the streets. You're doing stuff, especially if that's incentivized in some way. There's funding that's put towards it. There's, people who are getting either monetary reward or some kind of extracurricular kind of credit of some kind if they're college students. I don't know, but things that encourage people to be part of a community definitely seems to help their mental health in various ways, and um, because social bonding is highly related to mental health and mortality as a result.
Hmm. Okay. Yeah, sounds good. Um, those were the main questions that I had when I heard about the nature, as well as the questions I've thought about now in this train of discussion. Is there anything that you had in mind, or anything you wanted to talk about specifically in relation to this, or anything else really?
Not necessarily kind of directly related to this, but a kind of a big tangent would be a question on, given the talk that you had actually just prior to when I came on, it gave me a thought that
Hmm.
I've in the past considered making, I don't know, something like a YouTube video on like what is science, how do we know things, like almost entry level stuff.
Hmm.
And I was wondering, do you think having really easily digestible resources like that just available, like this is what science is, like it's models of reality. We don't say that we know the answers, but these are good approximations of what is true. That kind of thing. Would you think that that's a good idea to do, or do you think actually no, there's enough of that kind of stuff out there?
I'm not sure exactly. I'm looking up right now these kind of questions, but I'm only going to get titles and thumbnails, so I'm not going to be sure exactly to what extent the findings is satisfactory there. But for generally, what I would say is that there exists a lot of this type of information out there that is easily accessible and that has very valuable insights and that does explain the basics of, I hate pronouncing this word, epistemology. I think that's how I say it, epistemology. Um, and that there are kind of valuable resources, especially when holding these discussions, that somebody that may not be college or university educated could absolutely take advantage of. I think that they exist to a large part. I think the main issue is getting people to seek that out, or making sure that people seek that out. And I think that's kind of where we're stuck, because really there is resources on everything available on the internet. At the moment, there's fairly few things that are like, okay, we're lacking information on this at the moment. The main thing I think that's going to be the issue when it comes to working across like kind of empirical divides that exist right now within society, where people just believe in fundamentally different realities, is going to be like even a step before that. It's going to be more fundamental. It's going to be encouraging people to seek out more different types of information, and that's I think is going to be the main struggle there, because I do think that we have an overflow of information. You all the information that you need is available right now, like on the internet and in books, and in schools or whatever. So I think that this would be like the main approach to that would be, we really need to rework our educational curriculum for the age of the internet, for a society in which you can find everything, for a society in which there's a lot of misinformation, there's a lot of bad ideas floating around, there's very easy to get stuck in echo chambers, there's increasing political polarization. We need to prepare the upcoming generations for living in such a society, and I think that's probably the main thing that needs to be done there. However, on your proposal specifically, if you do feel that you have and you have like more of a finger on the pulse on what type of resources that exist right now, and you do notice that, hey, there's like some things missing here, or I can do this in a different way, I can make this really digestible, I can make it kind of like short and concise, I can make it easier to access, I can make it more appealing to certain forms of populations, certain demographic groups, then absolutely I think you should definitely go for it. But my answer to that is probably that the main problem is something a bit more fundamental when it comes to the human behavior in the internet age, that needs to be resolved if we're going to have the best shot at solving the issues we have right now in society with these divides.
All right, thank you. That was quite an astute observation, I think, by you saying that people. The problem is people not wanting to seek out that information as opposed to not having access to it if they were wanting to seek it out. So yeah, no, that's interesting. It is surreal to me to think that, because I'm almost 30 now, and like even when I was at university, the internet was not what it is now. And
Mhm.
back when I was in school, even I you use Google to find the answer to maybe a quick question from your homework, and that was kind of the extent of what I use the internet for, outside of maybe using like instant messaging things to talk to friends, and that was pretty much it. Whereas nowadays, everyone's life is always online, and so it's fascinating to see that difference. And as you said, maybe having some kind of education that's geared towards the internet age, and making sure that teaching people how to learn in a post-internet era is important.
Yeah, yeah, that would be that's the thing, and I would like to, obviously, in the future, and this is something that I want to improve at a bit. I want to have more suggestions, because I mean the easy answer to pretty much any of society's ills is basically, hey, make education better, fix the curriculum, do whatever. But I do truly think that that's probably the most important thing. But I do want to think of like other prescriptions and better solutions for this, that we can kind of accommodate that with maybe some forms of legislation on the way that media is handled, or saying that, hey, media needs to be kind of like structured in a bit of a better way that is more conducive towards encouraging further reading, more than just like clicks and headlines. Maybe there's things to look into there, but yeah, this is definitely, I think this is going to be the probably the defining yeah, the defining issue of the upcoming century, making sure that society can deal with the amount of information that we have available right now in the internet age, and all the echo chambers and stuff that comes with it. So I want to have more satisfactory answers to that. But yeah, that's where I'm at with that at the moment.
All right, cool. Well, thank you for having me on. I very much appreciate it. If you'd ever want to know more about kind of, I guess, science or psychology, social bonding, like neuroscience side of things, feel free to contact me. You have my details now, and I'll happily come back on and give you a chat. Otherwise, good luck at university, and good luck learning stats. I used to teach stats at a couple of universities, and so I understand that being on the receiving end can be quite daunting sometimes. So good
Mm-hmm.
luck with that.
Thank you. Yeah, the stats course, it's the most difficult course so far, but I'm trudging on it. Yeah, thank you very much. Good luck with yeah, with your research, and if there's anything particular that comes out, or you see something like you saw last Friday and you want to come on and talk about it, you just feel free to send me a message as well.
Oh, brilliant. Well, thank you, and have a good rest of your stream.
No, I was about to say YouTube, but you're not streaming. Have a good rest of your day. Bye bye.